Good morning. Um, this springtime here at Kirkpatrick Memorial, we've been looking at Mark's Gospel together, and we've been journeying with Jesus to Jerusalem. We've been journeying these last few days with him toward the cross, and the last couple of weeks we've spent with him in the garden. As he prayed in the garden, we saw Jesus bend his will to the mind of the Father and to accept the cup of God's wrath on our behalf. Last week, as we saw Jesus facing his arrest, we saw that he accepted the sword of God's justice and allowed it to fall on him rather than on us. Following Jesus' arrest in the garden, we're going to go today with him to his trial. We're not going to have any standalone Bible reading this morning. I'm going to read passages as I speak. We're going to be picking up the story in Mark 14, beginning at verse 53. I've got a wee sign here to help you to see that reference just while I'm speaking. Why don't you follow along in your own Bible? Feel free to pause the video for a second while you look up the passage. Okay, let's pick up the story in verse 53 of Mark 14. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, elders, and teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself by the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they didn't find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, "I'll destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another, not made with hands." Yet even their testimony didn't agree. There's nothing more dramatic than to be on trial for your life. Could you imagine that? That's what's going on in our passage. Jesus is in trial, and Mark tells us, verse 55, that the religious leaders want to put him to death. Any trial where somebody is facing a death sentence is going to be dramatic. And the dramatic high point of that trial will be that moment where the defendant is called to the stand. It's hard to imagine a more shocking and more dramatic testimony than the one that Jesus gives in his defense. Look at verse 60. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." There it is. He's finally said it. The high priest has put Jesus in the witness stand, as it were, and he's asked Jesus, "Are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And he says, "I am." As we've moved through Mark's Gospel, Jesus has avoided this line of inquiry, or he's thrown this question back to the questioner. But this time, in answer to the high priest's question, this big question that's actually been with us right through the whole of Mark's Gospel, it's still a big question for you and for me. Jesus, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? "I am," says Jesus. "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." There are two biblical allusions tucked away there in verse 62. Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. That's an allusion to an Old Testament vision recorded for us in Daniel chapter 7. The Son of Man there, he comes from the throne of God to the earth in the clouds of heaven, and he comes to judge the world. Jesus tells the high priest and all these other gathered religious leaders that one day they'll see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of God. This sitting at the right hand of God, that's an allusion to Psalm 110, where God makes his Messiah the judge of all the earth. Do you see what Jesus is saying here? He says, I'm going to come to judge the earth. Of all the Bible verses and images Jesus could have chosen, he chooses these particular verses and images to describe himself as a judge. Do you see what he's doing? He's on trial, but he says he's the judge. He's questioning the whole trial. This evening, you're judging me with all this corruption, with all these false witnesses. You imagine yourselves to be judges of me, but you couldn't be further from the truth. I am the true judge. One day I'll come to judge the whole world. One day I'll come to judge you. Folks, that's sobering stuff, isn't it? You know, many of us still sit in judgment of Jesus. Maybe you've never thought of it that way. Those of us who aren't yet his followers, who haven't yet submitted to his leadership in our lives, we're kind of weighing him up. Can he give me what I want? What'll I get out of this? I'll be the judge of that. I'll pass verdict. Even those of us who have chosen at some point to follow Jesus, we're still evaluating him. Can I follow him today? Does obeying him really lead me into life? I'll be the judge of that. I'll pass verdict on him. We act as though we're in a position somehow to evaluate or to judge Jesus. Truth is, he's the true judge. One day, he's going to pass judgment on me.